I will call the meeting to order. If we'd please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Mary Kay.
Dr. Dave Bardo,
Present.
Jill Maddock-Nelson,
Here.
Dr. Noel Deep, Tim Prunty,
Here.
Dr. Julie Sprague,
Here.
Danny Pyatt,
Here.
Seeing no one, I'll assume that there is no public comments this evening. For those, we are going live based on the information that Mr. Pyatt and Dr. Sprague said at our last meeting. So it's not live actually tonight, but it will be made available tomorrow. So we are moving to new business, which is the August year-to-date financial report, and Mr. Prunty is going to present.
So one of the things that I want to remind the board members is we use what's called accrual accounting. So what we do, and I mentioned this last time, but it's always good to try to remember, we're accounting for revenues and expenses in the year in which they occur, not necessarily when we receive or expend the funds. And why that's important, when you think of the July to August, in between we received local tax levies in August. But as part of our fund balance discussion, what's also important for board members to know, that fund balance isn't cash sitting in the bank. In this case, we've got in August, we've receipted back into June over $2 million in levy. And that's not showing up on the revenue side of this report. The one thing what's important to me is cash flow throughout the year, and we keep pretty close tabs on that. And if you looked at the board report for August, that was one of the larger ones that we had in a while. And we had board bills to the tune of about $1.6 million. And at that particular juncture, we have cash. Our operating checking account is in Associated Bank, and our payroll account, we keep at CoVantage. And we don't often transfer between banks. We get all of our deposits at the local government investment pool, and we like to take that money and then transfer it to either bank where we need it. We had about $1.8 million prior to the August meeting sitting at LGIP. And we had board bills, which would have been paid typically the Wednesday after the meeting, of $1.6 million. So we were able, because we got levy deposits, we were easily be able to make that payment. But it's just a simple matter of, where are we at with cash at any given point? So just to reiterate, fund balance isn't just cash sitting in the bank. So the results here that you're seeing are very typical from one year to the next. You can look and see in August there we received almost no revenues year to date relative to the budget size.
Which one are you on right now, Tim? Sorry.
The fiscal activity comparison report. I'm sorry.
Nope, you're okay. And
Do you have that?
in this packet, that was
That's
sitting
the
out?
grant ones.
Okay, so,
It should
is it in
be.
there?
August.
It should be.
no, I just wanted,
I see it on the computer, but I'm not seeing it in the packet. All I'm seeing is the grants.
Yeah, I'm just seeing grants.
I'm sorry.
Is it this one?
I'll get it to you.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like this.
Here.
I
All
can,
right.
You can pull yours
yep, I can pull mine up. There those are on. Okay.
Are you able to pull it up on board docs?
I have the fiscal activity revenues fund 1027.
Yeah.
So basically 74,000's come in, 700, yeah. And we spent,
Oh, yeah, that's not
3.4.
touchscreen.
How about I switch you computers once I get this up?
I'm sorry.
I should have brought
That's okay.
mine. I should have brought mine. That's okay. What have we spent then?
So,
Expenses, I just can't see that line. I see the operational transfer.
okay, so year-to-date, we've got revenues of 74,000 and expenses year-to-date of 2,492,719.
Yeah.
So just some unique things about this time of the year. In August, we start our contract payments for teachers. So typically, all of our support staff, our school year support staff are not included in August. And what's also unique, and again, getting back to accrual accounting, their benefit package runs through August. So this payroll, that's why there's such a differential between the payroll and benefits, is because they've received their benefits from the previous school year. And even though we actually expensed them this year, we put them in as payroll, or as payables, the previous, in June.
So the benefits for
The school, the
goes
prior year
through
school year.
August 31.
Correct.
I understand.
Okay, so that's really the difference. And then the biggest two items, there are purchase services. Purchase services are up, and that's everything that we do. When you think of purchase services, it's all services, and that can be everything from utilities, it can be a little bit of summer school busing, it could be things like professional development, but it's primarily software. And our software subscriptions run again from usually July 1st through June 30th. And in prior years, we like to look at where the budget was at and say, okay, we'll pay this in June rather than in July, because we have money now. Our auditors don't like that. They want the July's paid in July. So some of this difference is a shifting of things like, an example would be Skyward Software. We pay almost $30,000 a year just for our accounting software. And that, the year prior, we did that in June. This year, they're saying, no, we want you to do it in July. So that's the bump in purchase services. And the other big bump would be the non-capital, and the largest lion's share of that would be the purchase of textbooks that Amy made for the ESSER grant.
So the let me start over. Purchase services for this year, the increase was the software.
It's software, it's PD, it's the impact of just the ESSER grant in general, because we've got more activity going on. But you can see, it's reasonably in line with what we've done in prior years. It's a little bit up. The rest of it looks pretty squared away. I'm not I looked at last year's anomaly with insurance, and we must have delayed a month in one of our, and the insurances we're talking about there is insurance for general liability and workers' comp. Those are going to be the two big ones there.
Okay, so for purchase services, COVID or ESSER money, I'm just trying to think out what will next year look like, or is there anything you anticipate under purchase services that we are funding through ESSER that we would have to?
We have another year on the performance for ESSER. So
Yep.
next year, and we'll get into that in the grants, but next year we're dropping off of ESSER 2, but then we have this year and next year of ESSER 3. So we'll have some activity in there yet. We are becoming a little more reliant on purchase services when you think of things like software. And that's everything from the firewall on the internet to computer support to software for like EduClimber and Canvas, all of those different programs. So that's going to creep up over time. We do things like when we can't hire somebody, we might purchase more service from a CISA than what we would have done in the So that would be another reason why we're up.
Okay, thank you. The clarification was because I was trying to think of purchased items through ESSER that weren't like specific to a staff position, you know, like a purchase service.
So an example
Yeah.
would be, we talked earlier about 7-line sets. They purchased 7-line sets, and that would be something
Okay.
that would be a purchase service. And it doesn't, that one was maybe 18,000. But when you add all those little things up,
Correct.
yep,
So a one and done purchase service.
Yep.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Anything more with that, Tim?
nope.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to item B, grants report.
Okay, so Dr. Bardo asked me to go ahead and look at grants. And I'll preface my conversation a little bit where, just because I've been around a little while, I understand the grants probably more so than most business managers would. I'm reliant on a grant administrator to administer the grant according to the guidance set out by DPI. And when you get into some of these grants, they're just little, to me, on a $35 million budget, a $15,000 grant, I don't spend a whole lot of time, and I, in most cases, might not even know the purpose behind that grant. But let's start out with the Common School Library Fund, so we'll start there. This is a grant that is very unique to Wisconsin. So I put a little note that it's from the Board of Commissioners for Public Lands, and this one is one of my favorite grants because when Wisconsin established the territory, they gave a, I'm going to get I think it's a quarter section for education for every township. And don't quote me on the exact size, I think it was 160 acres. But anyway, they've sold most of that off. And they have a program now where municipalities and schools can borrow money from their trust, from the sale of these lands. And they charge interest for the use of that money. And that invests, and that pays for both school libraries and public libraries. And we receive, based on a school census that Mary Kay provides, we look at, I think it's 4-year-olds through 21-year-olds in the district, and we get funding based on our number as well as how well did the trust fund earnings do. We get about $90,000, and this is a budget that the former library media commission put together.
Does that vary, that $90,000 from year to year?
Yes.
Okay.
It varies both on the census data and on the earnings.
So this is a grant that is applied for annually?
It's an aid.
Okay.
It's automatic.
We don't know the amount, but it's, when you look at, and we're going to talk about fund balance later, this number, when you see the profit and loss, where we're budgeting more than what we're getting for an allocation, this grant is, I think we've got it in the restricted category. And the restriction is imposed by the state statute. It can only be used for material in the library. The material, we can buy computers for the library, but they must stay in the library. There's a lot of restrictions. But what's important is, on average, we get between $90,000 and $100,000 to support all the activity in the library. It doesn't, we still have to buy pencils and pens for the librarians and that kind of thing, travel and professional development, that comes out of the general fund. But everything else comes out of this grant. Okay, we're just going to keep moving along?
Sure.
Okay, so the next two are the ones that, we've got ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And this is kind of, I'm taking a little gleaning from what we have in our working document, and I posted it here. And one of the things I want you to get used to seeing is when we give you the budget report, I don't necessarily want you to know I've got a 6-digit number in the front there. When you see a digit it starts with a 1, that's direct instruction, that's direct classroom. When you see digits starting with a 2, that supports services. So when you get to our budget report, and the ones that we post for an amendment, you'll see instruction. And within instruction, there's literally 100 different 6-digit codes. But it's just important for you as a board member to know, when we're saying that 100,000 number, that's instruction, 200,000 number, that's support services. So, we've got essentially, $900,000 this year budgeted for salaries and benefits, so for people. And then we've got $469,000 budgeted for things, non-salary stuff. The lion's share there, the $255,000, was the purchase Amy made in July. When we get to the next grant, you'll see she's got more money available to purchase additional resources this year.
Can we go back to the non-salary items with
Yep.
pupil transport, BG and Neboken?
Mm-hmm.
Is that summer transportation in Neboken, like for the Friday field trips, or something different?
That would be, it could be a combination
Okay.
thereof, but it's primarily during the school year to get all the grades to and from Neboken.
Okay.
Oh, so this is not summer school, this is school year.
School year.
Okay.
There's two different things there. I've lumped both those two. And I think it's not quite an equal split. I think I'd have to pull out the documents, but I think we've got about 13,000 allocated for, 13 or 14,000 allocated for Neboken, and we had the conversation at last meeting, and I think it was $12,000, something like that, for the Boys and Girls Club after-school program.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions on that? Okay, so now let's jump to ESER 2. I'm sorry, yeah. The other thing that I failed to mention is I've got a little note there that also says when we have any of the federal grants, I don't care if they're entitlements or if they're just like grants, we have to expend the money first, and then we get claimed. So as you can imagine, the way it kind of works is we submit a budget, DPI then reviews our budget and says, oh, no, you can't do this, you can do that. Then we get an approved budget from them. We go ahead and make the quarterly claim, so we have quarterly expenses, and then we apply for a claim. And that whole process is probably shifted. They say it takes 14 days, but it's closer to a month. So from when we claim, we're about 3 to 4 months from when we actually spent the money. So our staff is pretty good at knowing that, particularly when we look at October, November, when we're going to get tighter with cash, we want to make sure we're making claims that second quarter as soon as we can.
What would be an example of something that you budgeted that they said, no, that you can't use that for? Do you have something off the top of your head?
It'll be things like, as an example, if we put staffing into the grant, we have all these new teachers now that we are putting on there. We can't claim them until the teachers have a license.
Okay.
So DPI wants to, if you're calling as a teacher, the teacher should be licensed for the area that they're in. Well, we've hired a number of students that either are right out of college that may not have their license yet, or they're in an alternative program to get a license. So we're going to sit on that expenditure until they get a license, and then once they have the license,
And you go
they
back.
got to submit, and then DPI has to approve.
The reason I'm asking is because there've been a lot of people in the community say, why can't we use the ESSER fund? Why can't they use the ESSER fund money for anything and everything? So if there was some items that we could say that you applied for, but then they turned us down.
So within the ESSER program, there are things like very specific. So we can use them for medical supplies, we can use them for disinfectant products, we can use them for trying to social distance, we can use them for after-school programming, and we can use them to address learning loss. So there's, and there may be a couple others, but those are the major ones. And if they don't fall within that category, DPI will question it. And so some schools are using social distancing as a way to put, let's say, a room onto a building. We've got a social distance, so we're going to expand. Then all the federal guidelines kick in, and then you must abide by those. You have to get a white sheet, and all that kind of stuff has to happen for wages and bidding and everything. So you can stretch it a little bit, but they've got targeted areas. That brings up another point. As a board member, you can take, you can know that we're relying on folks like Amy and Julie to make sure we're setting the right path. And then my department making sure we're doing the proper accounting. But then there's something called a single audit. And anytime we receive more than $750,000, either combined or in a single program, where we have to have a single audit done. So our auditors, we spend about, this year we'll spend close to $24,000 on the audit. And they will identify, this year they identified ESSER 2 as a potential for risk of errors and risk of ineligible costs. So because we get so much money, we're having an audit team come in and actually review all of our expenditures. And we have to document, and then we have to show that it complies with the approved budget. So there's a check and a balance there.
And we'll see that audit report when they're.
In January.
Okay.
I think in December.
And
Merry Christmas.
that's 750,000 in a calendar year? Or
In a school, in a fiscal year,
Okay.
our fiscal year. So we receive audits for title funding some years, because we're right at, last year was what, 680? We can receive it for special education, we can receive it for food service, and now we'll receive it for ESSER. So they're looking at those programs specifically and testing them. Questions on ESSER 2? The items there you can see, we've got $600,000 budgeted for the middle school windows, and then we've got $350,000 budgeted for technology. We've got one of the items that we've got targeted support teachers, 3 teachers, 1 at each one of the elementaries for that kindergarten and first grade to try to give them a boost, but those positions are still open. So we'll take a look at that, and I think we thought sometime in October we'd decide whether we were going to revise that ESSER budget and either reallocate or plan for next year and what we're going to do.
So the 1 is direct instruction, 2 is support, what's
Yep.
3? At the beginning of your 6-digit code.
Oh, 3 is community service.
Okay.
So, so what you're going to see in Fund 80 this year at the budget hearing, it's going to include the support of the mural and the daycare. You'll see that both in ESSER 2 and here. You have to put it under Fund 80, even though it's a federal grant. Okay? All right. So what we've got next, we have homeless children and youth.
Yes.
I'm not going to comment a whole lot, it's not a lot of money. This is one that Heidi oversees, and essentially it's, you can see it's from the American Rescue Plan, so it's stimulus dollars targeted for homeless students. And Julie, I don't really know the definition of what makes a homeless student. Is placement and foster care homeless, or is that not initially homeless? Or
That
pulled
is a
from the
good
family?
question. It wouldn't have to be, but it may be, depending upon circumstances, but.
I think it did prior.
Right.
So it's a minor to help those kids at that particular junction in time. And it's, there's restrictions on how we can use it, and it can be used, things like hygiene products, but it can't be used for food and clothing, that kind of stuff.
What-
You think that it could be because homeless, food, clothing?
It's a federal grant targeted, kind of like for,
That's how funny grants are.
Yes.
They really are.
and I clipped the description of what the program is, and there's 16 activities, and,
Because transportation's in this, isn't it?
I know we've paid for transportation.
For a child placed out of home, yeah. What's that amount typically, do you know? I know it's a small total, but do you have any idea, Tim, what, if this is typically about the $12,000 mark that we receive?
This is one time, this particular grant is one-time money. The only thing I can think of, Jill, is when we have kids that are, I'm gonna call them homeless, and they might be at maybe a shelter, we provide the cost to pick up for that
Correct.
transportation.
Yep,
And since the shelter's in town, that transportation cost is really minimal.
yep.
Applied yearly, or is this an aid?
It's just out of the general fund, and there's just transportation aid is all we receive on it.
No, the grant. Do we apply for this annually, or is this?
You know, I think it was a pass-through based on something, but you had to accept the, say you were willing to accept that, I believe.
I think you're right.
Okay, this is the next one. If we don't have any further questions, we can move on to youth apprenticeship program. So, in the bullet there, again, this is a state program. And so this would be Joni Fisher's program, where the kids are actually getting work experience. And there are requirements for the number of hours the kids have work experience. And to be honest, I can't tell you if this 6,800 is a normal. Joni runs just a great program. She's been doing it a long time. We don't carry funds over. We spend whatever we are going to get. She allocates it to her program, to all of the CTE. So we got FACE and medals, and wherever the kids are working, it gets allocated to.
Do you ever go over that?
She's got a little bit of her own budget, but Joni would never go over it.
I know she's pretty,
Spot on.
yeah.
Okay, what's next?
Mental health.
Somebody's mental health.
This is another grant, and again, this is, what do we have in there? It's a 2-year grant, and it must have been one of Governor Evers's, and I think that's 72,000, and Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's, do we get 2 allocations of that?
I believe so.
Biennial budget,
Yeah.
and,
So is this
And
year
this is the
one?
first?
I think last year was year 1, and this is year 2.
Okay.
And again, because it's mental health, that's coming from support services, so everything is going to be that 200. Okay.
So I see that some of our CISA money comes from this for that support services. Right?
Meaning we pay CISA
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a service? I'm trying to think what that,
Is it in the line items that we approve, that we pay CISA annually?
This would be an additional contract above and beyond our base contract, but it would be something you would
Thank you
approve.
for reading my mind.
Yep. This next one is one that you should be familiar with as a board member, and it's the AGR grant. So because of it's based on free and reduced lunch status, and it's geared for kindergarten through 3rd grade. And on average, we get something like $2,000 per student, eligible student between kindergarten and third grade. Actually, it's K through, because it's not 4K.
Correct.
So it's K through 3. And you can see the budget there by building, and it's a per building allocation. And the grant administrator is really supposed to be the principal. And Amy and Julie provide oversight of this grant. And what we've done is we're actually, we had some accumulated underspend. And this year, on the assigned fund balance, 425,000 of that assigned fund balance is the AGR grant. And what we're trying to do is we're shifting dollars from the general fund to the grant to, in our case, in most cases, is class size reduction. So some of the staff can come out of this fund to maintain 18-1 or 30-2. And then the other portion of the grant, the stuff of the grant, could be used for both curriculum materials or anything that's supporting in the classroom. And again, there's specific guidelines, and I've put the strategies, and you'll hear about the AGR report. This one is fairly monitored by DPI. They have semi-annual reports that they do, and then they do a year-end report that's due at the middle of August.
So that would be based off of that form, that household income form then? That we ask parents to complete?
Some of it's direct certification, so it's a combination of both those forms.
Say that again.
So like with SNAP or
Food share programs
Yeah.
and things? Okay.
so families can direct certify, or they can fill out the alternative form.
Thank you.
What's important is, they no longer let schools apply for it. It's a 5-year grant program, and every 5 years we have to re-up. So, we would be in a world of hurt if at some point down the road they don't continue with this program, because we're getting almost $800,000 a year to support our kindergarten through third grade. And the principals have a fair amount of discretion with how to use the funds. And really, the non-salary part of the budget is really whether, if you have a very senior staff member, like 3 or 4 senior staff members with higher salaries and higher benefit packages versus a new teacher right out of school who's still on their folks' insurance plan. The allocations are such now that we're targeting the salary for the bulk of it, because it's difficult to spend $200,000 on stuff at an elementary level without, it's a lot of money for them. Okay?
Can that be used for curriculum?
Yep.
Okay.
Only K-3 though.
Sure. When is the last time this might be a question for Amy later, when was the last time we updated our K-3 curriculum? Or is?
In which, like ELA?
Yeah, in
Would have
any of
been
the subject
just before I
areas.
got here, so
Okay.
over 5 years ago with the Lucy
Was
Calkins.
that Lucy
Yes,
Calkins?
yeah.
And we've invested a lot of PD in staff, so they use that primarily for PD for those teachers.
Okay.
Okay. Carl Perkins, this is one that is just a thorn in my side.
It's been around forever.
So it's a federal grant, and it's great. It's for CTE, You get $25,000. You have to have an LVCE license to manage your own funds. So that requires a master's degree plus 36 credits just to administer the grant. We can go to the consortium and give it to CISA, roll it over and give it to CISA 9, and they will manage it for a fee. We spend, this year, we're doing better than we were in years past. We spend almost $10,000 in administrative costs administering this grant. And in together with the youth apprenticeship, and what's the other one? There's another one coming up here that we're going to talk about. But there's just a lot of survey reporting. You have to talk, what are your students doing after graduation? What fields are they going into? Did they choose the CTE field? You have to do all that federal reporting. And it's a lot of work.
And this is grant that you oversee?
The CTE department does.
Okay.
And we actually, right now, we have an employee that's part-time, Marla Conkle, who is a semi-retired gal from Merrill that has the LVCE certification to administer the grant.
We have nobody else in our district that has the certification.
Correct. Josh Zaluski had it, but then he left.
Do we have anybody that is looking to become that level?
No, not that I'm aware of.
We do, but that teacher has an alternative pathway, so would have to get a bachelor's, a full bachelor's first, and then a master's, and then 36 credits. So it's an awful lot for a $25,000 grant.
Do I know that person?
Yeah. Michael?
Okay.
Right. Okay, so this is the other grant that the whole department works on, and this is the CTE incentive grant. So when we have those aligned courses with NTC where kids can get certifications, the year that they graduate, we can get up to $1,000 per student for certifications that they receive. And there's some certain pot of money divided by the number of certificates across the whole state. So 1,000 is the max, but we rarely get $1,000 per. So in addition to the 25,000 and the 6,000, now we've got 15,800, and those three together are what's used to support the CTE program.
Which three, sorry?
Yeah. So it's the CTE incentive grant, Carl Perkins, and youth apprenticeship. Okay, what do we got next? And this one is just the requirement to do the teacher evaluation. And we have to have software to do it. So DPI gives us essentially a pass-through where we spend $15,000 on the software, and then we get this grant and we pay for the software through the grant. But it's a requirement from DPI. And I don't know that I would call this one a grant. This one is one that we run in Fund 13, and that's why I included it. It's Red Robin Machining. And it ebbs and flows based on the kids that sign up for it. But it's part of the capstone course, and the kids are doing machine tool for like a mini business. And we give them either a stipend for tools or a stipend for tuition if they turn a profit. And they just operate as a business, and they try to break even. And they have a little bit of profit they can use for buying additional material or buying additional tools for the department. Then this is one where the next one is Neboken. And we have the timber harvesting policy. Is that in Neola?
I believe so.
anyway, it's, we have, both at Neboken and throughout the county, we have school forested land. And the revenues from that are targeted for environmental education. So when we do a timber harvest, we might do one once every 4 or 5 years. We would get it. I think this last year we had a little thin-in and we got $2,400. That $2,400, rather than just throw it in the general fund, we target it for the Neboken School Forest. And eventually it's gonna pay for transportation to and from. We used it to put up the pavilion, put in the generator and the pit toilets, that kind of thing.
You said that we have other land besides the Neboken, other
Yeah.
forest properties?
We have some up by Neva, we have 80 acres up by Neva. We have some
And what
in the
do we
town.
use, what do we use all the other land for?
They were lands that were deeded to like, they might have been deeded to, let's say, River Grove, and I don't know the exact, they've been in district ownership. They have, almost every single one has a reversionary clause to it. If we choose not to manage it, it reverts back to the county. So there isn't, we can't, it's not like we can go out and sell them, because we've looked at that many
Well, that's
times.
where my thought was going.
Yeah,
If we're not using it for school, let's put it back on the tax roll.
yeah, but it
But if it
reverts
goes back to the county, then it's
yeah.
still not gonna be on the tax roll.
Right. And they're isolated 40s or 80s, you know, they're, for the county, they're a little bit difficult to manage.
Do we allow people to hunt on them?
We do.
Okay.
We are, as part of a school forest, we get free assistance from the DNR. So the DNR assists us in managing them and writes the, you know, timber prescription and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so Neva has 80 acres, where else do we have land now? I'm just curious.
You know, I don't know that off the top
Testing
of my
it,
head.
come on, you know so much off the top of your head, Tim, I thought for sure you'd be able to.
You're gonna love my November.
Well,
Can you read what I have there?
we've got that.
Is it on the November? Well, then let's just,
So I was gonna, you know, at the end, I'm gonna say what I want for October, but then was gonna give him 2 months
So,
because when I ran the first time, I had people telling me we had all this land that had been granted to the school district. And so in my head, as we're going to be losing funding, do we have property we could sell that had been given as gifts to us? Do we have lake property, for example,
Neboken.
besides Neboken?
Not that I'm aware of. We
So
have-
anyway, I'm,
Bluebell is one, which is out on H. We have one 40 over on Vilas, which is on C right across the river, so it'd be just west of River Road. Then the 2 40s up in Neva. And then we've, you know, I mean, we sold the 40 at Crestwood, we sold the 40 at Pleasant View, you know, that went with the school. I'd have to look. We have them all documented. There aren't that many now left, but we have 180 of it at Neboken.
I didn't know that.
so I guess
I just.
where I was getting at, Tim, was, because I'm familiar with school forest, because both Windberg and Burnhamwood each had, so we had 2. So I guess what I was getting at as I was looking at November, I wasn't talking school forest, but do we have other properties besides school forest? Because,
Door Street.
well, that's sellable. Boy, I can tell you're getting close, because that was good.
You got any other ones you want to get rid of?
I like the rewording.
But, you know, if, because I didn't mean to bring this up till the end of the meeting, but I understand that, yes, all these little schools had school forests, we manage them, we sell timber, but I was led to believe by someone in the community when I was running the first time, that we had other properties that had been willed to the district that weren't forest land.
I'm not aware of any in the form, this would have been,
'Cause, to be honest, as we're, as it gets tighter and tighter, if we have land that we can sell, then it's a win-win because we get the money for the sale and then it becomes taxable.
yeah, and the former superintendent put a description of all of our properties together, and I'm gonna guess this is like from the early 80s. And we've disposed, like I said, of some of them. I wasn't aware of any of them that didn't have reversionary clauses on them.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah, and we can provide you that list. Okay, then the last two that I've got on that list are the Fast Forward Equipment Grant and the Wisconsin Art Boards. And the Wisconsin Art Boards, one is, again, Justin Markgraf, the grant for the community mural that's gonna be happening. And then we're gonna expend that this year. And then the Fast Forward Equipment Grant was that iron worker that we purchased. And one of these, like the Fast Forward Grant, it sounds great, but it's a 200% match that you have to have as the district. So and those are available quite often. But you can see already the CTE department has other avenues, and it's a lot to come up with a year 1, year 2, and year 3 matches of that kind. And this year, we were allowed to do, some of the match came from the relighting project, and they allowed us to consider that as a match. So the LED lighting, all of that cost associated with the tech ed wing, we applied that towards the match. But, so those are the other two. So I guess my takeaway as a board member, what I want you to think about is getting back again to, we have a budget of.
There was
One more, American Rescue, Kids Ahead Initiative.
Oh, okay. And again, I don't know a lot about this one. We're gonna get two of it, we got 38,000. And again, it's a mental health grant and the goal of it is to develop a comprehensive mental health systems of support. So I think the teachers went to a training this summer that would be a part of that expenditure. And Evers announced last week that he's going to give us an additional funding level. So we're going to have roughly almost $80,000 to spend on it. Again, it's this year and it'll be done.
So 80 more for the 38?
No, between two, we'll get two 38, 400.
Got it. So this is year 1.
This is year 1, we'll get year
Yep.
2, and then it'll be done, but it's.
Got it.
Okay. So I think my takeaway is that we've got a $35 million budget, and this year we're gonna spend $5 million on grants. And again, I have to rely on the grant administrators. I have to think twice when I think of all of these grants. What is the purpose of the grant? How are we spending the money of the grant? And what are we going to do when the grant goes away?
Right.
So I don't know that I would worry to get too granular about, particularly the ones that are, if they're under $100,000 as a board member. I know that sounds like a lot, but the grants have such strings attached that there's not a lot of discretionary spending in most of the grants today. They're for a very specific purpose.
It sounds like the one grant, now I don't remember, the one grant that is very tedious and small,
Carl Perkins.
yeah, requires a lot of time. thus money to implement the grant.
The good thing is we get improved, I mean, it improves the overall CTE instruction. So that's really the benefit, not so
Sure.
much the 25,000. It's driving technology forward in that area, but it's a pain. We do as much for that grant as we do for grants of several $100,000.
Do we have somebody in the district that searches, looks for these grants, or is it just various staff members come across particular grants?
I would say various staff members based, like Heidi's really good, anything in her area, because she's well-read with DPI and what they are offering. I would say the CTE department is always looking, so it's really left up to the department or person in charge. We do not have a specific person designated to search.
So the reason I ask is on Welcome Back Day, I was in with the Forest presentation, and the teacher out there, I'm sorry.
Faith Newman.
Faith does a great job. But Faith was saying something about Noboken would be nice if we had some playground equipment out there. And then when she said that, she said maybe somebody in here could help us to get that, and her eyes fell to. Are there places that she could go to potentially to help get some playground equipment? And then also to get the lake area, I know that's been a passion of yours, Tim, ADA accessible. If we could try to do some projects or get some people's minds focused on those two at Noboken, because it sounds like that is going to be a great facility to use more frequently as the school years come. Because I know the teachers were just excited to sign up their classes to go out there this summer. In that one session that I was in, I mean, they were lined up with Faith to get their classes signed up.
Sounds crazy, but like, could a mental health grant go towards Noboken? I mean,
For
when
those projects?
when you look at things like fresh air, vitamin D, there's a lot of data to support those alternatives
Yep.
classroom settings, and it provides opportunity for breaks. I don't know, I know,
Faith does such
Run
a
it by
great
Heidi.
job. She said, to say that this is 100% necessity may not be, but it would be a great asset for Noboken, especially your younger students. But, my son's a senior in high school, and he loves playing on the playgrounds too.
keep them engaged.
I'm a senior outside of high school and still enjoy the monkey bars. Of course, I don't think we have monkey bars anymore.
We do.
We do?
Somebody breaks an arm on them every year.
Yeah. I always like the dome shape when you, that's what I like. Merry-go-rounds.
Julie, do you know, speaking of who writes a grant, sorry, this recently came up with the dual credit class with NTC, if the district writes a grant, is that one of these ones? Or if,
Dual credits actually at the next meeting on the agenda.
yes, because is it grant funded though?
No, NTC provides,
So then I can,
we uploaded last year's contract, so you can
Right,
see it,
right.
because they don't
Oh,
have
it
this
didn't
year's
show.
ready
Okay,
yet.
okay, sorry, I can wait,
Okay.
but it came up as a grant
A
question
question.
in the community, so,
I don't know if I'd
I'll
call
pause
it
it.
a grant, but that'll be
Okay.
good when I read it next meeting to.
okay.
The certification
that
one
once.
is, so if they're taking like automotive, and they're getting dual credit on that automotive class, and then they get a certification on top of it, we would get money back in the CTE incentive grant portion of it.
Yeah,
When kids get their CNA, they're getting potentially credit, and when they get their CNA, then we get some money back from the CTE incentive grant.
thank you.
Everybody good on grants?
That was
Thank-
a lot.
That was really good.
Thank you, Tim.
Good, thanks, Tim.
That was-
Thank you so much.
And I just caution the board, and again, there's some things that I'm gonna call it, and Danny, you've been to Bob Solner's presentation on School Finance 101. And I think there's some things that are just really, really important for the board to understand, and our next topic is one of them. You know, and as far as I'm concerned, the ESSER funds and how we use the funds, that's appropriate at the board level. But when we start getting down into the weeds, in a week, you're not gonna be able to retain it because you're not in it. You know, we have a grant specialist and a grant administrator that's working the grant. And, again, the guidelines are pretty tight. I want you to be focused on what are we doing here, because this is important, I think, for the future of the district. And that school finance at the convention, 101, there's a lot there.
He does a great job.
And if you get to understand that, you'll be a much better informed board member. Okay, so can we move on to fund balance?
Yeah, let's do new business C.
Okay, so within this is our fund balance allocation. And I told you that fund balance is in cash in the bank. The first category is an example, non-spendable, and that we have prepaids now. But you can have fund balance, which is, in this case, it's often an insurance premium that we paid, or it could be an inventory. The result of fund balance is accounts receivable, and the difference between accounts receivable and accounts payable. So there's a lot of things that aren't simply cash in the bank. The next item down there is, there's a category where you see that 936110. So the Q is an equity account, and you don't need to know all the details, but DPI requires that if we're self-insured, which we are for dental, COVID's had just a crazy impact on our dental expenses. Normally, we are running dollar for dollar for what we put in. It's just a benefit, $1,000 benefit per individual on the plan. And it pretty much runs whatever we pay in premium, we give out in expenses. But over COVID, we've accumulated over the last 2 years probably about close to $150,000, I think, in 2 years' time.
Because people weren't going to
They
the
couldn't get
dentist.
in. They
Yeah.
couldn't get in.
Well, that, and I've spoken to dental providers, dental hygienists that shared COVID mouth from the masks, the oral hygiene component of masking also. So shutdowns, and then the wait list to get back in for appointments missed, and so that doesn't surprise me.
Okay, and the next one we'll talk about when we're finished. I mentioned that unspent, the fund balance that's restricted. The definition of being restricted is it's restricted by an outside governmental entity, and that one happens to be state statute and the public, or the Board of Public Commissioners for Public Lands. They put that restriction on. So that's reported that way. It's required that it's reported that way. I'm going to recommend that we commit funds, and we can talk about that at the end. The next one is unassigned fund balance. And there's two things there. One is cash flow, because when we get into the first part of December, the last part of November, depending on where that payroll hits, we generally are pretty tight with cash. Since we, during COVID, when we didn't expend all those funds and we put them into fund balance, we don't have to short-term borrow. With a district of declining enrollment, it's pretty comforting to know that we're not short-term borrowing. Because prior to that, you need a fund balance of it pretty darn close to 20%, or you're going to do short-term borrowing. And as interest costs go up, that gets to be, previously, we were spending in the neighborhood of $35,000 to $40,000 a year to borrow that much money. And it got to be where it was almost a teacher position. So it's enviable not to have to short-term borrow. And again, in December, there'll be generally not a whole lot of money sitting around.
Is that why you have that 500,000 set aside?
And the 500,000 is, the reason I have that's for emergency, is that's pretty much one payroll.
Okay.
So I think, we should always have enough cash to make one payroll. And we always have. But after that payroll's over, sometimes we don't always have 500,000 in the bank. And it's just important that we do keep that. And I'm assigning that just myself. That doesn't take board action. It's nice that the board is going to approve our fund balance. But it's just letting DPI know that we're using it for cash flow and for emergencies. And then finally, we have the grant carryover, and we just went through that $526,000 in grants. And again, those are grants that are state awarded or local awarded, and we actually have the cash, but it's assigned to the grant. So let's look at that HRA and what I'm going to ask, what I think the board should do. So we've got this self-insurance, and I've talked about it, where we're buying premiums for, and we'll just use a family plan. We're buying premiums once medical bills get to $14,100. So the first $3,000 are going to be paid by the participant. The next $11,100 is paid by the district. And that's what this HRA account is. And by committing it, the board is acknowledging that the money is to be used for HRA purposes. It takes board action to commit it, but at any point in time, the board could take action to pull it out. It doesn't take a supermajority to reverse it, it just takes board action
To pull it out.
to pull it out. But I think going forward, because we've increased our liability so much, that it's just prudent that we, whatever that cash balance is in that account, it's a segregated account, that we commit that for HRA purposes. And we used to have it under restricted self-insurance, but I couldn't find where the board took formal action to do that, and the auditors made us pull it out. And last year, we reported it as unassigned fund balance. And I don't think that's wise to do.
So what you're saying, Tim, is you want me, where it says proposed motion at the next school board meeting, to make that motion?
Correct, I think that that's
Okay.
good. And then the board can, at any point in time, we can go to a different insurance plan, and you can move that money, but under the current plan that we have, it just would be prudent. I've even talked to the auditors, and I'd like to get a clarification if we commit it, and I'll get that before the meeting, whether we could use it for short-term borrowing. So let's say you got into a pinch and you needed to borrow it for 2 weeks, could you pull it out of that account? We have never done that. But could we do that if it was committed?
Then we wouldn't be paying the interest to a bank, we'd just be borrowing from ourselves.
Yes. Yep. So I'll get that
Be nice
answer
if we
before
could
the
do that.
meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Then there's a note there that if you look at that, our board policy is 10% of Fund 10 expenditures, prior year Fund 10 expenditures. So even with it restricted, we'd be at 16%. That, we're in a very good spot to be, but we're facing some pretty strong headwinds over the next couple of years. So it'll give the board some latitude going forward. And the thought that you have to have as a board member and as a business manager, we want to keep the levy we want to keep, I want to talk levy. We want to keep the levy, how much we're taxing, relatively consistent. If we start spending money, the legislature's putting aid into the formula. So if we start spending more, you're temporarily going to drive down
The levy.
the levy. And you'll have no tool to control it. The only tool we have is end-of-year spending. So normally districts have some kind of debt. We have no debt anywhere. And they can defease debt to control the levy. We don't have that option. And I think it's important knowing that in a school of declining enrollment, that we maintain fund balance to whatever extent we can, but know there are implications going forward by spending it too quickly, or you have a plan for how you're going to spend it now. So that's it.
So this is the only one item that you want to move forward for the board? is that one
That we
motion.
need to move forward, yeah. Thoughts about that, committing it?
I have no problem with it.
That
I-
recommendation is because that's where it was, but in the audit, you couldn't find anything to validate the board
It was
decision, so.
actually, it was restricted even tighter.
Got it.
I'll be anxious and curious to know if they would allow us to borrow our own money with that restriction on there, committed to the purpose.
All right.
Well, Tim, for October explanation of the titles.
Yeah, that'd be a lot easier.
Of course, the budget update, and are we going to get a third Friday count at our September meeting?
I would hope so.
Well, I assume, but if we could have it for this grouping, 21, 22, what it is this year, and then the projection, and I know that's a big guess, but you're just moving up the grades. Seniors are gone, and a projection on 4K, so that we can kind of see what we're, if we're having a big drop next year. And I understand it's an estimate.
Are you saying you want 21, 22, or 22, 23, and 23, 24?
21, 22,
No.
last year's,
No.
third Friday count, this year's third Friday count, and then take away the seniors, make a projection for what you think based on what we're seeing over the past couple of years for what 4K would be, and give us a number so that we can just kind of see where we're headed.
You kind of projected that with the birth rate, haven't you? If
Yeah.
I recall seeing that.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Tim, thanks again. You do a great job for us, and I appreciate all you're doing for us.
Yes, thank you very much.
So,
Yes,
except for the selling a Door Street comment.
Do you want to adjourn?
Yeah, we'll adjourn and get ready for our 7:30 meeting with curriculum and instruction. Thanks so much.
7:31, so we'll call the meeting to order and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mary Kay, would you do the roll call, please?
Jill Maddick Nelson,
Here.
Dr. Dave Bardo,
Here.
J.D. Schrader.
Here.
Amy Downs,
Here.
Dr. Julie Sprague,
Here.
Danny Pyatt.
Here. Do we have a binder for JD?
There's a blue one right behind you, JD.
No,
Oh, I think that's Jill's.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I took the attendance out,
Do I need a binder?
Sorry, no.
You'll get one.
but the attachments should all be on, right?
You want to
Yeah,
use it?
everything.
No, I can use that.
Yeah, okay. All right. And I'm going to confirm there's nothing under public comment, correct? Okay. So then we'll move on to new business. And first, I'll just share, Dave did earlier as well. The committee meetings are now being recorded. Is it video also or just voice? They're being recorded and will be available the following day. So that changed since the board meeting announcement from President Pyatt. Okay, So new business, letter A, dual credit courses.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for accommodating me in a virtual capacity this evening. I'm prepared to talk a little bit about dual credit, and then I just wanted to touch base on the Start College Now and Early College Credit programs, which are in our policy, and I just wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of that. We won't have the numbers to you until after October 1st for early college credit and Starter College Now, because that is the deadline for when families are to notify us that they would like to take one of those courses, which I'll get into after the dual credit presentation here. So I am going to share my screen, and I realize that I'm only on the little computer in there, but you can, the first document that I'm going to bring up, I'm bringing up the agreement that you have attached in the documents. So this NTC dual credit agreement is what we agree with NTC on every year. It's pretty standard. It doesn't change a lot. What it highlights is that NTC agrees to provide the curriculum and provide some training for our instructors. They also agree to provide some registration materials, maintain communication with us for any questions that we have, and share the course and great information with us, so that we can deliver that curriculum. We need to follow their grading scales. We need to follow their curriculum exactly as it's delivered at NTC, so that they can make sure that we have a quality product that we're delivering to the students, and they're getting the same level of course that they're delivering at NTC as well. Then once completed, that student gets, when successfully completed, that student gets high school credit and college credit for that class. So first I want to ask if there are any questions about this dual credit agreement, which will come before the board to be signed once we get the updated version from NTC for this year.
Clint, is this, how is this, I'm sorry, I did not actually see that this attachment was on here, so I didn't review it ahead. It might be, my answer might be in here. But what's the funding source for the dual credit courses?
So this is not, there's not a funding source for this. We provide that as a benefit to our students. And MTC provides this as a benefit to our students as well. There isn't a charge to the students or a charge to the district for this, just an agreement we have with MTC.
The teachers have to have the certifications, but we help to get them certified if they need that.
So the welding program, this is where the question stemmed from, the welding dual credit course. I asked about sustainability and how do we grow that and build on the momentum of the current enrollment numbers. And the response was that it's a grant, it's funded through a grant right now, so longevity is questionable because it comes through a grant. So then that's where the discussion started with NTC or staff.
I don't even see that on, oh, Metals 1, is that what that is?
So the academy, that welding academy, Jill, is different in a sense
'Cause it's
than
not even on
what
the
we're
list.
talking
I didn't
about
even
here
get that
with
far.
dual credit.
Got it.
That welding academy, we're sending students to NTC for that
Yep.
welding academy. With the dual credit agreements, we're using our instructors to provide that instruction. So if we if we did send students to NTC, in case in point that welding academy, then we would be charged for that tuition for the students if it wasn't covered by that grant.
That was very helpful, thank you, because I think there was, the language used was a dual credit, so that's helpful.
Now, it still is dual credit.
Correct,
But that's not
Different.
what
yeah.
we're talking about here. When we look at our list of courses, which, like I said, I apologize for being on that small screen. But we have a list of courses here, written com, math for the trades, algebra 2, college algebra, psych, animal science. There's a list of a bunch of courses here that our instructors are providing the instruction for our students here. Now, there's a couple that you see are highlighted, like advanced culinary, and our cabinet furniture design, and then our graphics arts dual credit classes. Those are highlighted because right now our instructors are not certified to teach the dual credit part of the class. Now, they can still teach the class, but students aren't going to get dual credit for it because our instructors have to meet certain requirements to be able to teach those dual credit classes, which if they can be licensed instructors to teach high school classes without those extra stipulations to be able to meet NTC's requirements.
Sure. Yep, so the differentiator is that it's our staff. Thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
In our building.
Oh, good point. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
How does college algebra 1 work? Is that like algebra 1 and 2, or is it like trig and, I can't remember algebra very well.
Calculus.
Polynomial?
Yes. So the way our math sequences work is everybody takes algebra, everybody takes geometry, and then last year we had it approved by the board to be able to offer them 2 different options to go algebra 2 or to do math for the trades, both of which are of the dual credit capacity. College algebra will be on top of that algebra 2 class.
As in, it's the same, it's the equivalent, or as in it's a third algebra you could take if you really wanted
It's
to
trig, I bet.
get good at algebra?
It's
It's-
beyond.
It's trig, right? Trig and/or calculus.
We offer calculus, but not trig.
He's asking about the content of the
College algebra.
That's
Oh.
after
That's-
algebra 2, right, in the sequence?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it'd be
Yep,
like
it's
a
after
4th
algebra
year.
2.
So college algebra or calculus or pre-calc. And that's their book then, they provide us with a book.
And we have to purchase that curriculum for the students, but they say that this is the curriculum that we need to use. If that makes sense.
So if I can just share, our dual credit offerings are one of the highlights of our district because we do offer so many options. When other districts see how many options we have, they find that very interesting that for such a small district, we're able to offer so many choices. And that's much credit to some of our teachers who are willing to acquire those additional certifications because it is additional work for them.
Is it hard, how do you guys market them to the students?
So I'm sure Clint's gonna talk a little bit about this too, but with Start College Now and Early College Credit, our school counselors, when they're going through those parent meetings, they advertise it in their newsletters, different reminders to the students all the time about these options at an early age, so that they start thinking about those things, because a student can leave with many credits already under their belt as they enter, whether it be a technical college career or other university. So there's lots of options.
Yeah, so the big push there is through our 8th grade meetings and through our junior meetings, for both our dual credit courses and our early college credit and Start College Now. We do send home, in the newsletter last week, I sent home this letter which details the Start College Now and early college credit programs. So when you hear early college credit, that means the UW system. When you hear Start College Now, that means the technical college system. So if a student wants to take, they have to be completed with 10th grade. So if a student wants to take one or more classes at the UW system or the tech, after they complete 10th grade, they can enroll in those classes, and then the district would pick up the tab to pay for that curriculum, or those credits. They have to let us know by October 1st if they want to take part in that for the spring semester, and they have to let us know by March 1st if they want to take part in that in the fall semester. And both of those things are in our board policies with the early college credit and Start College Now. Now, when I was looking at the policies, in one of them, I can't remember which one it is here, and I had it written down, but I think I left it at school. In one of them, it says that if the student enrolls in one of these programs, Start College Now, Early College Credit, and they either withdraw or fail out of that class, that they are responsible for that tuition reimbursement to the district, and the other one does not. So just something that I noticed when I was looking through policy, that's something that we may want to synchronize in the future, so that both of them read the same as far as what our expectations of the student are if they withdraw or fail a course that we're paying for.
Clint, whenever you put your hands on those policies, send them to me so we can arrange a policy meeting and get those together.
I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Does that happen much where that would apply? Where someone fails out? like
No,
that?
it doesn't. It hasn't happened in my tenure here, but it's not unheard of in talking with other districts.
Well, because I think there's, in terms of, is the Start College Now policy the one where they can pay back tuition if they don't meet requirements? You remember offhand?
I can't remember which one it is, but I can definitely find those and send them to you.
Yeah.
They're 2271 and 227101 are the policies.
Because it's not just, for NTC, you can be responsible for paying back tuition costs for not meeting the classroom expectations too. So like not showing up to 2 or more classes. So it's not necessarily a failing grade, but also the expectations of the course. Which you,
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
but just, you would want students to be responsible, especially in a dual credit. I mean, so there was other parameters, at least through NTC, that could have a student have to repay back
Right, I'm
to the
wondering if
district.
that's why it's in one and not the other.
That's what I'm wondering.
Tim can help us, Tim
Bannock?
Bannock, thank you, from Neola, might be able to explain that.
The cost is only, they're like $200, right? It's not like 2,000, or is that?
I'm not sure.
I would take a guess it's
Yeah,
higher
it's
than.
not an astronomical amount, but there is a cost to it. And this also, when we get early graduates, when we get early grad applications, that is something that I talk with them about. college credit and start college now because it's an opportunity for those kids not to graduate early, still be a full-time student, and get some more college credits under their belt. Now that's with the stipulation that we don't offer a similar course. So they can't go and take college algebra at NTC, and we would pay for the tuition for that because we offer that course here. If that makes sense.
Yep. Any other questions? Anything else, Mr. Rogers, you have or wanted to discuss with early college credit and start college now? Those are like tongue coasters.
No, I can
Okay.
just say be looking for that list of students at the October board meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint.
Thanks, Clint. Okay, see you later.
All right. Now we'll move on to new business. Item B, curriculum cycle update. Yeah, I feel like we should have a drum roll.
Okay. So you've had a little bit of time to look it over. So, I did share this with the staff at one of our opening PD days. So we did something this year that we hadn't really done in the past. We actually reviewed a lot of the work we did last year and talked about where we're at with the curriculum review process and helped them understand kind of what we had done with some of the science and social studies. We talked about common instructional practices, and this was part of it as well. So they saw these documents too, and they understand that they're drafts in draft form. So there's 3 uploads there. There's the upload of the description of each of the years in the cycle. There's a draft of the contents grouped by grade level, so like, it might say ELA, and then 4K through 3, and then 4 through 12, and then there's also a document where they're grouped by where they're at in the cycle. So I know that this document with the explanation looks pretty overwhelming and a little bit perhaps much. And just know that we're not quite to this point yet because we aren't yet in a flow of being in the process of doing this and having different groups at different parts. But the point is that this would provide a roadmap for teams to know what they should be focusing on when they're in their meetings, not only on what they're teaching at the present moment, but also planning in their curricular process based off of the new standards and maybe new resources that they've selected, and revising the different items that are needed to keep the curriculum up to date. So I'm really interested just to hear questions that you have or thoughts that you have regarding any of the documents that are shared.
I'll go to the draft subject area.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I understand, that when we bought the curriculum, it was, different subjects, different grade levels in certain cases. Are you planning to try to get where, for example, as we go out, to coordinate where we have math all in one year, English all in one year, social studies, science, and then have like what I would call flex years in between where we divide up the other curriculums that are being taught, especially here in the high school, that maybe aren't being taught down in the lower grades, to have those in like a flex year. So then it would be a 5 or 6 year cycle so that when these curriculums that we're buying now, at some point in the future, that like mathematics will all be 1 year, and so that everybody knows, okay, this is the year we're going to really work, and we're going to end up, at this point, we're going to be buying the curriculums that year, so that we all know going forward. So that was my only issue, only because what we did this year just to buy the curriculums that, there was social studies, there was math, there was English. And I know at Whitburn, is that everything was 1 year, so that everybody knew, hey, this is a year, all the and you can divide up the elementary teachers that, with their strengths, to put on different committees, so they're all not doing curriculum every year, at least, because of the way you have it set up on the first page, that some years are much more planning than others. So that was the only thing, Amy.
Yeah, and Jill and I had actually talked about that too when we met to set up the agenda for this meeting, because that would be ideal. And sometimes DPI will separate some of the standards too, like they actually will separate like early literacy and then other pieces of ELA too. So we have to have a little bit of flexibility. Unfortunately, we're in a little bit of a situation where some of this work hasn't happened for a while, so we kind of had to take some of the pieces that are maybe higher need to start and then get some buy-in from all of the teachers, because I also share your thought of splitting up teachers into committees at some point too, maybe even as soon as next year, to help tackle some of the math and social studies and science at the elementary. But right now, we're all getting on the same page with ELA, and we just worked through, I led a session during PD talking about our ELA beliefs as a district and what we want for our students and what we want to see in high quality materials and how we're going to work through that process this upcoming year. So I really felt like it was important for us to all be together before we start to
Sure.
off. But then that's why this says draft too, because we will have flex years and sometimes we might notice something is maybe taking longer, or it might be more challenging or more comprehensive. When you think of an ELA curriculum, there's a lot of components versus perhaps like a music or an art resource would be a little more straightforward and not have so many pieces. So yes, those would be desires that I would have as well, and we'll have to just modify that as we hopefully continue to move on this path. Good question.
What did you say curriculum writing meant?
So I was going to ask if you could give an overview of each assessment, implementation, monitoring. Yes, because I'm thinking for those of us not in education, listening again, like this is really my goal and what we talked about, Amy, you and I, is like the roadmap moving forward. So if you could give a definition or an overview of each of those.
Yep, so when we get into the first year, you're really wanting to understand what those changes might have been in the standards from DPI. So you've heard me say a little bit about big shifts in science and social studies, about inquiry-based, not so much about content anymore. So you're thinking of critical questions, comparing, contrasting, synthesizing, analyzing, arguing, using evidence. So that's really kind of just understanding what's different from what we had said before to what we're going to maybe have to change now. So you wouldn't want to choose a resource right away when you're doing that, because it would be too hard because you're not quite sure what those differences might be. So then when you get into year 2 and year 3, then you're starting to see, okay, here's the changes I have to make in the green year, if you will. Like, here's the changes we need to make in the curriculum. What are the gaps? What's kind of exposing? What do we not have resources for? Or is it evident enough that we might need to have a different resource? So then you get into maybe selecting a resource at that time, or even into the purple year if you needed additional time. And then you'd start to look at your assessment data and how is that changing. It wouldn't be uncommon to have another year, maybe in year 3 or year 4, as you're implementing and assessing to see, getting more information or implementing to make sure you're doing it well. Right now, we're trying that out with a few curriculums that we went through this year, for this year, so we'll see how that goes. So then you're really focusing on using the resources to fidelity in the orange year, making sure that teachers are getting their questions answered, we know what we're doing, and we're just adjusting what teacher needs might be.
How does DPI set the standards?
They do a process where they kind of call a committee together from across the state, and then you can actually provide feedback as well. They'll do like a survey that they'll send out, they'll do a draft, a survey, then they'll bring the committee back together and they revise it. What I've noticed in my short time in this role is that sometimes it takes a little bit longer than they might originally intend. So like, I have this document that I printed off when I first started this, like, okay, each of the years they're going through these things and coming to see that it doesn't always hold true of what exactly they're saying. So that's why we have to have a little bit of flexibility.
Did they
to
give
start.
you a decent document that says this is the summary of changes, or do they just expect you to pour through hundreds of pages and then find the new ones by chance?
It's a good question.
So I found that I had to use some resources and other people who actually combed through and you found some of the bigger changes. It was more evident for the ELA standards, but then when we looked at the math standards, it was a little bit harder. And sometimes we call those things like crosswalks, like what are the differences that you notice between one or another. But there are people who will help with that, and they're often from CISAs too, where they kind of specialize in that area.
So do we have to pay for CISA to do that, do we pay?
No.
Okay.
So like for CISA 9, where we do most of our work through Tomahawk, we pay to be part of a consortium. So they'll share out information in newsletters, and I use them often as like a, hey, will you guys, I've shared this with many people there, like, will you look at this and see how, if I'm on track with what I'm kind of thinking, and they'll give me feedback, or I'm noticing this, and what do you think about this? So they're a really good sounding board too.
When there's a change in the standards from DPI, how long do we have to implement that change?
Well, I don't know if I've ever heard like a really specific timeline where we have to like be firm on they're implemented now. But you have to realize then a lot of the assessments, like the forward exam that we have at the state, will then change eventually to include the new standards. So they'll make notices of that, like the forward exam this year, like last year when we took the forward exam, DPI gave us notifications saying 4th and 8th grade social studies forward exam will now include the new social studies standards this year. So the assumption is that you've had some time to look at it as a district, you've adjusted your curriculum, and now your students are ready to be assessed.
Do they give you some old, like, 10 sample questions from last year's test or something? Could you bring one of those? I'm just, like, when they say we're going to, do social studies or we're going to do compare and contrasting, I'm just always really, I feel like you have to sort of know the content before you could compare and contrast something. And so I've always liked to see the, it's been so long since
So you can actually go on
Their
DPI
website?
forward exam, and they have sample questions per grade level. I don't know if that's always open, but that's what our teachers do to help prep students as well. So it'll be by grade level, and you can do sample TDA, it's called, like text-dependent analysis. You can check out what that question looks like and how you might want to prepare students. And it'll give you by grade level, by subject, practice problems. So you can take them.
I'm probably much too lazy to do that, but if I made you bring it and present it to me, then I would do it, because you taught me.
It's not, it's just a couple clicks. But there is a place on DPI that you can do that.
One thing I was going to offer that we have been working hard to even help our teachers discern between would be a resource and a curriculum. I don't know, Amy, if you want to speak to that, but when Amy brought to you in the spring resources that you approved, it doesn't mean that you can go page by page and go through that whole text in a year and you have your curriculum. Not at all. Because the standards, there's nothing to buy, a resource that you can buy that is a guarantee it covers on all the standards. It's a compilation of lessons that teachers create. You might have information out of this resource, then you have to create an assessment, hands-on activities. So the curriculum is it's what takes forever to, and it's a living document that you revise each year and after each lesson, whereas a resource is something you purchase that is just part of the curriculum.
Can you get through all the state standards in a year? Or is that like not even possible?
Not really.
Is it
I
like
would
half
say
of
no
them or
as
something,
well.
or?
You can't even really identify a number for a certain content because they vary so much by subject. But what is a good kind of rule of thumb is if you're in a quarter, you probably want to stick to about 2 to 4 essential standards that you're trying to address in one quarter. So that could look like 16 in a year approximately. But it's different for grade levels too, because if I'm a first grader I have to learn at a really rapid pace around reading, phonics, comprehension. I'm doing a lot of things fast as a young learner, whereas at a high school level, you're really getting deeper into the content and your comprehension and the ability to answer questions and do those higher level thinking skills. So sometimes I don't always know that our teachers have a good awareness too of other content areas. I was just talking with a teacher last week who typically taught in like a world languages department, which it was, where they had speaking and listening and cultural awareness, and they have about 5 standards, but they can get pretty deep. Whereas then looking at like a 5th grade ELA standard for the standards for the whole year, they're like, whoa, this is really a lot of standards, because you have reading, you have writing, you might have some phonics, and so it's different.
Could we ignore the standards if we wanted to? We would get theoretically bad test scores? Like, can they force us to teach to the standard?
Well, you as a district can choose to write your own standards if you'd like to.
Please don't.
I'm not advocating for that, because it would be, you'd want to have somebody kind of doing that job almost all the time. I
That
mean, you'd
sounds
have to
terrible,
be
but-
a very proficient district, I would say, in order to make
So you have to have
necessary
some
modifications.
standards.
Yeah.
You can't just say, we're gonna teach history today and we're not gonna worry about some
But
standards.
what we do is we take those standards and we work with them. We pull, like you said, essential standards, and then we determine mastery levels, right? Because the state doesn't necessarily give us that. So for example, comprehension will be part of that strand all the way through, but what kind of comprehension? And when do we want that mastery to happen? Is it 5th grade or 6th? So there are all these moldable pieces that when you look vertically, then that's where that collaboration time becomes so important, so that we're not, because there's no time to waste, right, when you're trying to grow achievement. So if I'm a 5th grade teacher and I know that it's emphasized in 6th grade, that should help me just know I provide the foundation. I don't have to look for mastery, and then I can move on from that standard. Does that make sense?
And we've been able to do that quite a bit, K-12, ELA, and math, and then also, for K-12, ELA, and math, and then also 6-12 and all of our other content areas, and also art, music, PE, we've been able to do that. Our missing piece really right now for the 4K-12 curricular areas will be science and social studies at the elementary. We need to refine those for sure, moving into next year.
So our curriculum is based off of the standards, which is then tested upon. So teaching to test for the test, there's some truth to that, because our curriculum is coming from the standards and we're getting tested based on the standards.
Yeah.
So we're not, so if we were to say, here's what we feel our biggest area of need is, we could do that, but our test scores, like you were saying, our test scores then wouldn't reflect.
Right. Yeah, so
That-
you can do some item analysis too from some of the tests, like ACT, forward exam. I know at the high school, they've done some of that work, like looking deeper into the test questions and what they've asked, and maybe what kind of success we've had with certain questions or not. There's also an art to taking some of those standardized tests. Like, not every learner is a great point
Test
and
taker.
clicker, or now they've tried to put some interactive things in there where you like have to move around maybe parts of a sentence or order things from like sequence and first to last, but there are some test-taking strategies to help with, I mean, a standardized test isn't always the greatest measure. That's why when we're really digging deep into a student's need, we might look at other things as well, and we should, like their classroom assessments, things that we do school-wide instead of just always the state test.
My knowledge from the Knowledge Gap, that Natalie Waxler book is fuzzy, because I read it, I don't know, a couple years ago. But one of the things they talked about was that some districts in Louisiana, it has a state standards test, but the districts would get waivers from the state, and they'd teach a content-rich school instead of the standard ridge school. And they would argue that it would be more fair because then you sort of know the content that's going to be on the test. So you're actually evaluating the teachers based on what they taught. So like if you have a bunch of rich kids and they learned at home all about, I don't know.
Lots of background knowledge.
Yes,
on
you have lots of
something.
background knowledge on that subject, and then they say, find an inference about that subject that some kids know a lot about and the other kids don't. Well, we say we're trying to test your ability to find an inference, but you're really testing your background knowledge. And so that makes it a really hard, even if the teacher's taught really well, we're still gonna miss that test question. You're gonna get behind because, it's easier to do it with the right background knowledge.
You know what's interesting, I'm sorry, go ahead. No.
Well, it reminds me about early literacy. Danny and I just talked about this recently. Our teachers are noticing that some of our youngest learners are coming without even that oral ability. So not only do we have to teach them to read and write, but in many cases, we're starting with the speaking component too, which in an environment, a home environment where that is really emphasized and you pick vocabulary up, that's great. You have such a strong foundation. But when it isn't there, we're behind already in helping those students achieve.
Yeah, well, and when it's not there and with masking, daycares, we're noticing that too with developmental gaps, just from infancy, 3 months to 2 years, that developmental delay from masking too. So a compilation of different factors with the literacy coming into 4K. Okay. One thought that came to mind, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have a grandson that wasn't talking, that was 2 years old. And the parents went and got a speech path to help the child, and the first thing out of the speech paths to the parents was that it's because of the masking of COVID. All these younger kids weren't seeing facial expressions, they were in their own little world, that they weren't talking. Fortunately now, the child has been around other kids in a daycare, and guess what? Doesn't stop. And that's good. But, yeah, the speech path said that was the big problem for 0 to 2.
Another thing too that's been noted as having be a big shift for younger students and children is technology too. So if you think back, like a lot of play used to be back and forth, you're fighting, arguing with somebody else, even if it's over a toy or a block or whatever. But if I'm in control always of only what I hear and see as a young child, and there's no one talking back to me, it's all one-sided, it's noticeable the length of responses too sometimes, like a 1 or 2 word utterance, like yes, no, instead of, a longer conversation and the ability to maybe ask a question back because they're not used to the back and forth as much. So just a lot of things in our society affect that. Not knowing nursery rhymes, like you might think everyone knows, like, hey, did a little, the cat and the fiddle, or little boy blue, or whatever they might be. Those are kind of passé a little bit and not as common as a reference or that background knowledge that you were talking about before. Yeah, lots of shifts.
How does group work tie into standards and testing? I'm thinking I know our math curriculum has a lot of, I feel like there's
High school?
another one, yeah, high school. Or another subject area at least, I thought there was at least 2, where it's very heavily group focused. So everything is small group work, the individual test. But I'm just thinking out, it's very interesting to me because it seems like a disconnect. I'm curious your feedback of group work for the learning component of it, but individual testing and how that ties into standards and test results. There's less individualized learning and more group learning, but individualized testing, if my question is making sense, or statement maybe. It feels like it's a disconnect because you're not taking a group test on what we're being tested on and what's generating our results.
Well, I would just offer in general group work is, you'll be part of a group all the way through. I don't know, I think math would be the exception because they do often work in those problem-solving groups at the high school level. But other than that, I think it's more about the social element of problem-solving, communicating, all the roles that different group members have. But you're right, it wouldn't transfer to taking a test individually.
No, right.
The only way it, like, did you ever have groups, like we'd have a group of 3 or 4 when we were in high school?
Not often.
And if I couldn't do the algebra problem, and maybe the kid sitting next to me would help me, but maybe they didn't want to because they wanted to get their homework done so they didn't have to do it at night. So then you'd sit there and you'd wait till the teacher would come.
Yeah.
And so then you'd have to wait there for 5 minutes before you could move on. And in that sense, it might help you because then you learned and then you could keep going. That's how it felt more studying in college. You'd sit there with a couple people and you'd do your problems and someone would help you. But that seemed a different atmosphere than high school. And nowadays, you can just go on the internet and it'll do the formula for you. So I guess you don't even need that. But
Math is not my strong suit, so I would have deferred everything to my partners, guaranteed. I can tell
you
you that
would
right
have just
now.
you wouldn't have bothered to look. You would have taken the. I wouldn't blame you.
Me
Take
as
the
a
easy way.
student, I
Yeah.
would need the direct instruction or feedback from the teacher. Otherwise, I'd be completely lost, and I would just say, how do I do this? And I'd write it down and have no absorption of how to do it or retain it to do it individually.
Yeah, and I never went in and watched the math classes, so I don't know what they're.
So I think what you're kind of hitting on with what you're saying is there's different ways to make sure that students are getting what they need when you're learning. So some students need a lot of individual feedback or direction, and some do well with peer support and Q&A, and some do well in group work. That's why the teacher is so important, because they are kind of the facilitator of, okay, I know Jill is gonna need a check-in, every 3 to 5 minutes or whatever that looks like to keep her on track, but JD is gonna partner with Danny because they can get the tasks done together. And that's kind of why I think when we look at research around what's so important in the classroom is it really comes down to that teacher and the student believing in themselves that I know I can get this done if I'm JD, and Jill still feels like she knows she can get it done because she knows I'm going to come help her every 3 to 5 minutes or whatever that student needs. Do you know what I mean? So there has to be a variety, but as far as the connection to the standards, if you're asking is it required that they do a group work or things like that in the standards, it does lend to presenting, collaborating, being able to debate, or in high school especially using words like argue with evidence and different things. So there is a part where it has to be with your peers and what they do.
And a significant emphasis on more than one way to solve a problem, even in math. So I'm old enough, I just learned, the
Efficient way.
yes, the times tables, without understanding really how they applied. And now it's all about, in my very simplistic synopsis, understanding mathematical problems. That's even more important than being able to solve them. Does that make sense? Like, times tables, yeah, they're a thing, but it's not, I know. That's why people of my generation are so frustrated with the current math standards, because they're completely different from how we learned.
Well, it doesn't feel efficient to the job market currently of the current standards from how we learn to now, because it is efficient to, know the multiplication table, and so that's a struggle.
I shouldn't minimize, it's important, especially for speed.
That was just an example,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, but that mathematical understanding that's why teachers will say you have to explain your answer. Otherwise, if you use a calculator when the teacher isn't looking, there's no evidence of learning there. So you have,
I'm pre-calculator.
right.
Add like
Yeah.
this then.
I knew how to do that. Yes.
When you talked about factors, I just wanted to note too, with different factors of testing and students, some students test better than others and things. I was in a meeting recently at the middle school where the temperature on the day of testing was extremely warm, and there's no AC in that area. So even those environmental factors, in my opinion, professional opinion, wasn't conducive to learning or testing or producing results. So those factors would be pretty important. I would actually I wonder if we could do some kind of minimal tracking of those kind of factors, because in my mind, this 80-plus degree classroom with no airflow is going to impact test results. And those are things too that are not controllables for us, but we can at least reflect on maybe some factors that did contribute to results in some capacity.
I feel like I recall, and I might be misspeaking of what the activity was, but I know that like here at the high school, there were some things going on. I remember seeing some emails about if you want to use my classroom for your hour because something was going on like that with AC versus not AC, and people were adjusting to that too. So, yeah, those things kind of sometimes happen
Was that
naturally.
state testing, or was that like Fastbridge type stuff, or don't remember?
Wouldn't have been state testing yet, so it must have been.
I think I focused on the temperature where I was like, wow. Wait,
You didn't say what
I'm
kind of
not even,
test
no,
it
I'm
was.
not even, well, it was one of our
You did better than me, you knew at least.
Well, if any
No,
of
it
you were
would be
at
social
open
care.
house, even at the middle school, it's pretty toasty there too. You know, when you get to the third floor, it's warm.
I contacted Jake about the elementaries too. The classrooms were great. Did any of you go to elementary? Classrooms were great, but the foyer area and gym where they took the pictures, it was
So our fancy new air conditioning didn't get into the gym and
uncomfortable.
Well, some of the doors were open for a long time and there was high traffic, you know, a lot
A
of people.
lot of traffic. They were, well, you probably saw in Week in Review, only over 90% of families
Yeah.
attended.
Really
That's
high
incredible.
turnout. That's a really good transition too,
Okay.
if we're comfortable with that, to the
I was
assessment
ready to do it.
calendar.
Yep.
So
just
we're
flipped.
talking about assessments, I'm gonna try to keep us moving along. So this is the second year where we worked to put together something that looks like what you see here. So previous to this, we had only focused on nuts and bolts, what do students have to take, and there was no connection to why we would take it or what the staff might have to do as well, because we want our staff input regularly throughout the school year. So what you see on here is not only the time period and who it's for. So if I look at the top, I'll see fall students. So here are some assessments. Now, not every student is taking this every year, so you'll see some discrepancies in the dates. But then you'll also see the alignment of each of the assessment to our district goals. Is it part of a monitoring of an academic goal? Is it part of monitoring our school conditions goal or a leadership goal? And then you'll also see the same for the staff, so that we recognize what we're asking of them too for input. And again, this isn't always the same group of staff at the same time, but we wanted to pay attention to what we're asking of them too, and are we asking for the right data from the right groups of people and have enough to make the right decisions as we move forward. So as you look at this, what questions does it raise for you, or what thoughts do you have?
I'll start with sharing. Thank you for bringing this, Amy. This came up because in meeting about the agenda, we talk a lot about data and the data collected and review data every 90 days, 100 days, X amount of time. And so I asked Amy if she could bring something to outline where we get our data from, how often, because it seems like we do a lot of data collection and a lot of analysis of the data, and it almost feels overwhelming at times. And so just trying to better understand what data we're talking about when we're collecting the data, who's involved. So this is really helpful, and I appreciate this a lot, Amy.
I'm noticing a couple errors, so I hope you don't see them, but I will fix them. I just sometimes, like, from transferring year to year, you might miss a year of where it said 2021 or 20, something like that, but just a couple Well, and we added 4K, a couple more assessments, so that's what I'm noticing, like in reading, there are some places where I missed the 4 in front of the K, so I'll adjust those, but.
And I would offer that this is cleaner and more intentional than in years past too. We don't just blindly assess to assess. We want it to be purposeful and know, are we going to use that data? And if not, why are we collecting it? So I think it still looks like a lot, but we're doing a better job at our intentionality.
So last spring, something we did with our school level teams is we did ask them to write down every assessment that they're giving in their school. And then we aligned it to, does it have a purpose? How much time does it take? Are we using the data? And the buildings then really looked at, some of these things we have to do. Like, we have to give the forward exam. We have to have a screener 3 times a year. But what are the other things we're asking of people that, is it really necessary? So people did like an assessment audit, and we brought that back then this August when we wrote our new plans, like, okay, don't forget, you said some of these things we didn't really need. There's maybe something better already covering that. So they did a great job of what are we using our time for and what's giving us the best data for what we need as well.
So like grade 1,
Yep.
it's different fall. There's
Yeah.
more on the assessment. That's what this chart is telling me.
So in Fast Bridge, if that's what you're referring
Yes.
to, so remember I talked about like grade K and grade 1, expectations increase at a more rapid pace. And it's smaller things maybe, like letter recognition, 26, okay, got it or don't. Do you know what I mean? But those things are usually administered one-on-one with a teacher or a reading support teacher. So those are a lot of paper and pencil things that the youngest are doing. So they do evolve and change more quickly throughout the year. Whereas when you get to about grades 2 and 3, they can take, where a computer will modify the questions for them and adjust automatically to whether they're answering them correctly or not. But those earliest ages, it's more of a one-on-one assessment.
So can FastBridge do like tons and tons of, it's a big nationwide thing, right? So can you click Wisconsin standards and it'll offer up a certain number of tests, or do you guys just kind of pick the ones that you think are?
They give us a set of tests that will give us the fast track results that we see and present with you at the board 3 times a year, where it combines like that A reading and auto reading score. At the younger, you might recall that we have like an early reading indicator, and that's a little bit different because of that rapid change in the testing. But around 2 and 3 is when we get into that scoring that combines the two, where it's combining the A reading and auto reading. So that's recommended per the company, and actually our elementary teachers and principals are going through a process to better understand how we can respond using that data and what can we do in our classroom. What does it really mean for our students at those youngest ages as well, so that we're understanding and also setting up systems in our classroom to respond right away.
Did you tell us that the teachers meet with Amy McGovern's group again, the early literacy group? Was that this summer, or was that? I can't
So we had
remember.
more teachers go to the Foundations of Literacy, yes, this summer. And then also at the beginning of the PD days, she came for a day and trained our staff, primarily our reading teachers, some of our special education teachers on specific interventions, like reading mastery, which is an intervention to help skill build and really identify the key pieces that students are missing and then support them in that. And she's coming back to support on our next PD day, September 30th, to get some like Q&A about some of the resources she's helped us with, but also follow up with some of those teachers that have gone to a foundational literacy, which at this point is almost all of our K through 2 teachers and some of our most of our special education teachers.
Did teachers still like it, or the next groups that went through?
It was a smaller group because we had almost everyone. There was about 6 that attended this summer.
Anyone want to do it twice? Or I don't know how long the training was.
It's
that
a
they would.
5-day training now.
Oh.
It started off as 4, and it is a lot of information. So
Right.
something that was interesting when we did our ELA beliefs is we had beliefs that were sourced from like Wisconsin RTI, Science of Reading, from the units of study, just different, about 50 beliefs to choose from. What was interesting is some of the things when you talk about like morphology, morphemes, graphemes, some of our higher ELA, like words are. And that's some of the things that they learn in the foundational literacy course, is about the pieces of words that you need to understand to help students read. So it was just interesting to hear those comments. So in conjunction with the assessment calendar, I have shared with you this other document which is posted on our website. And this is a required document to have posted. And if you did visit on the website, these links are live, so you could click in to better understand.
It's the last page.
So is it uploaded, Amy, or it's just
I
a
think
hard
so.
copy?
Which one is it?
I think it might be in the data sources perhaps.
There it is, thank you.
So are all of these live?
Anything that's blue.
They've been live for a while, haven't they? I went on prior to or following our meeting, must have been after, and I could not get them to
Work? So
You
this
went
is,
on the website or in here?
through our website.
Okay.
sometimes if it's a PDF, you have to press Control and then click the blue. And I don't know if that was
I
some-
used my phone.
But I can double check that to make sure that the links are working. But this kind of then gives a little bit more specificity to the assessment calendar. So like, why do we give the forward exam? What is the purpose? Is there any sort of law or policy that why we have to give these? What is the time commitment? When are the time frames? And then how do we get results shared with people? So this is a template that part of it was provided, and then I had some pieces I had to fill in. And the one about reading readiness, everyone has to have a screener, especially at the youngest ages, and we use FastBridge to do that. So that was specific just to our district, because other schools might use STAR. You might recall we used PALS at one point. But a lot of this information was provided for me, but we have to make it specific for us.
We've gotten selected for the NAEP?
Yes, we have. We did last year, and we were before when I was middle school principal as well.
But it's not out for this year yet, right?
It is out, that
It
means
is?
we're not selected.
Okay.
So do they do the
Well,
whole,
can you
that's,
define, yes, I know,
This
but I'm
is-
just thinking like if I'm listening and following
Yeah.
along or not familiar with it.
it's like the, I'm gonna call it the fanciest test, I don't know if that's the right word. It's the one that they do, it's some sort of national standardized test that
Yeah.
they've been doing since the 1970s or something. And it's the
Assessment of
same
educational
test for
progress.
every, and there was just a big hoopla a couple
Progress.
weeks ago because
It's there in the blue on the left.
everybody's scores went down a ton around.
So based upon
COVID.
Amy's response, it's good that we're not.
Well, because it puts a lot on the school when you're selected. It's a whole nother testing window, and it's not all of the kids that take it. So like, when I had to arrange that for just the 8th grade, when we had 8th grade, we were selected. And last year, we had 4th grade was selected and 8th grade, but for 2 different content areas. So you have to then provide them with your student list, and they don't pull all the students. So it's like a third of your students are out of class for that day, but they come in and proctor it. It's very, very structured, like JD says, this has been in place for a long time, but there's a lot of communication, there's just a lot of communication with assessments anyways. This is another one
Is
to
it
plan
a
and
one
prepare
day
for.
or 3 hours or?
It's one day that they come in, but then if you don't have enough participation, they come back. So that happened last year at the high school where we didn't have, I think the threshold is 90% of the students selected, so it's not all of your students. And they will come back.
And again, it just makes it so difficult, because what are the students not selected doing?
Yeah.
I mean, you can move learning
Yeah.
forward, but then all
Yeah,
of these
they're gonna
other
be
kids are not there.
So
It's
do they
it's
give you
tough.
school-specific results, or do they just aggregate that into the national or state results?
It's really then uploaded into the national statistics by state. So
Yeah,
it's
I've
not
never
something
seen-
that you would get a individual student report for.
Yay, we're not selected this year.
Exactly, like
And I'm sitting here thinking, there has to be an opt-out,
Oh, yeah,
but there's
there's
not. I know there's
not.
not, but, oh geez.
I just read today, I get an update from DPI, and it said that it would have gone out in late August if he would have been selected. And in my mind, I like did a little happy dance, because I was like, not that it's not good to participate in things where you can like nationally be a part of trends and the data to collect, but it is another burden on our
We've
principals.
done our part, yeah.
It's a burden on staff and students, and we can't use that data. We
Yes.
can't even receive the data, so,
Yeah.
yes. Makes sense to be excited for this year.
The board exam is untimed, so you can have as much time as you want.
Sure can.
Used to be timed, not anymore.
So, so what if the kid doesn't want to go on to the next section, but the rest of the kids are ready?
We have makeup time
So you get to go finish the test?
at another time.
Really?
We always have them have books or other things, you know, if they finish early, and
I
of
would
course,
think-
we encourage them to check their work.
I might have taken all day to take that test. Give me
Yeah,
untimed
so
test.
we talk a lot about how you proctor, you know, like the middle school spends the most time, so they have the most students here that would take the variety of tests, but especially 4th grade and 8th grade. So we give like suggested amounts of time for class periods that would somewhat fit accordingly for the majority of students, but then the makeup process is very sophisticated.
It's very weird because you could remember the questions and go to break and look them up. You know, so like it's like a weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of things put into place to not help that to happen.
Right, because that's our big state report card. Like,
They've had students like you in the past. They know what to do. They write in stuff
Oh, JV.
for their proctors.
So also with that, in that last agenda item, Jill had asked for some, and I put on the bottom of this document other because I know that there are probably other words that sometimes I or Julie or somebody else uses and you're like, I don't know what she's talking about or what they're talking about. So Jill and I brainstormed a few of the data sources that I know that have been brought up just to help clarify some uncertainty, and I did not make up these definitions. These each come from each of the companies just off their website, what their purpose is and what their point is. So if there's other things I can add to this list to help kind of the comprehension of the conversation too, but on here I put Infinite Campus, which is our student management system, which is really where we house all of their information. WiseDash, which is the state's repository of data, all things data, so it pulls directly now nightly from Infinite Campus. Anything that goes in there is updated nightly now as far as like student enrollment information, demographic information. Skyward, we use primarily for a budgeting software, but other schools do use it for their student information system. We do not use it in that capacity. EduClimber is our newest purchase that replaced FiveLab, and that is our data warehousing. And we've gone through one training with a small team, and they're very impressed with its capabilities, and we're really excited about that. And then FastBridge is our universal screener that we give 3 times a year. So if there's other words that you're wondering about, just let me know, and I would be happy to add to the list.
for access, does every student take that test, or just students that you think might?
For the access assessment, that's for students who are EL.
Okay, so it's not
So
every
English
student, it's,
learners.
you target it if you
Yeah.
know they can't speak English.
Yep.
Yep, and then that happens, so if a new student were to come to the district, they would get a WIDA screener. So WIDA is like the Department of, if we're speaking a different language and we need to kind of see where the student is at. And then they would determine from the screener if they would be part of the access testing then in the winter typically. And that window has changed a little bit when schools were closed, and then the following year when we reopened, they extended that quite long. So it's typically around December, January, but it's kind of switched around in the past couple of years.
I probably should go backwards. Like for the fast spreads, for the letter sounds and the blending and stuff,
Yep.
are we, now that Lucy's still getting harassed, and I know that we don't get our phonics from that, but do you feel like we're more systematically teaching phonics now than we were, say, 2 years ago, or what program
Yes,
are
because
we?
we didn't have a resource 2 years ago.
So which one are we sort of using now?
So right now we have a Fontes and Pinnell resource for phonics. We also have 95% group for phonemic awareness at the 4K and K level. But we actually aligned the Fondas and Pinal pacing guide to the order that is taught in Blevins phonics system. So I don't know if you're familiar with, these are all different.
My guess
Just,
is you are.
I'm
only
not
Blevins.
familiar with that particular one, but so that's just an order of
The way
letter
we-
frequency or something? or-
Yeah. So based on this staff's learning through the foundations of literacy, they wanted to kind of mirror our progression of phonics acquisition for students, for lack of, I'm not so great always with the terminology, that's exactly right, but the order in which we learn how to, different sounds and the combination of sounds, they wanted to mirror more closely to a resource by Wiley Blevins, which is somewhat rooted in the science of reading. So we took our resource and aligned it to that sequence without making an additional purchase at this time because we had just purchased the other resource. So that's up for debate if we want to make a change in the upcoming year, but we're trying to really take the feedback of the teachers and what they're learning